History has seen many individuals face the executioner, be it via beheading, hanging, drawing and quartering, or burning. There has always been a role that needed filling, that role being the executioner themselves. Like many, an executioner normally came from a background of criminality and the wrong side of the law. Someone needed to do the job, so why not a man or woman who needed to repay a debt to society? Jack Ketch, otherwise known as John Ketch, was no different. He spent some time behind bars in Marshalsea Prison in London, and it is believed that he became executioner to pay off his debt. Ketch had a career spanning almost a quarter of a century, and in his time he became known as the most infamous executioner at Tyburn, and he earned a reputation for his brutality. For an executioner, that was certainly something that the condemned did not want. Even after his death, his name brought fear, for Jack Ketch became a slang term for three things: the executioner, death, and even the devil himself. As stated, Jack Ketch was on the wrong side of the law before his career as an executioner, but other than the fact he spent time in Marshalsea Prison, very little is known about his early years and life before. The first mention of his name is in a proceedings from the Old Bailey in 1676 for a man who was executed for the murder which took place in Whitechapel. The man also murdered the bailiff who arrested him, so Jack Ketch was called as the executioner, it appears. This is evidenced in the following excerpt. The jury brought him in guilty, and Jack Ketch will make him free. Jack made quite a career being the bringer of death to the condemned. He even found himself in the Plotter's Ballad, where the execution of Edward Coleman is depicted. Accused by Titus Oates of being involved in a popish plot, he was executed for treason in the December of 1678. In the woodcut, Coleman is saying, "I am sick of this traitorous disease," and Ketch is illustrated holding a rope and an axe and replies, "Here is your cure, sir." Jack Ketch received payments for his services, but as time went on, he decided he was worth more and went on strike for better wages, and he won. But that being said, it wasn't just money that an executioner would receive. The clothes of the dead were given to the executioner, as was the rope if they were hung, and both of these could be sold for a profit. You see, it sounds quite morbid and gruesome, but anything in relation to the dead, paraphernalia if you like, was highly sought after by the public. It was believed to be riddled with magic, and it was in high demand. A hangman's rope strand was to be a supposed cure for a wide range of ailments if worn around the neck, and it was also thought to boost luck for gamblers. Since ancient Rome, a strand of the noose, if wrapped around an affected temple, could cure a headache. Did they work? No one cared, and no one questioned it. The public was willing to pay for whatever they could get their hands on. Now, as I've stated, Jack Ketch had a reputation, and it wasn't a good one. He was, as some would say, incompetent and brutal. His methods, however, may have been down to an external factor. There wasn't what we would call quality control, and bribery came into play a lot. You see, if the condemned had money, they would use this to try and buy a quick death, and Jack Ketch, as would many of the other executioners, rely on these bribes to top up their wages. You see, if you were sentenced to death by hanging, you could be hanging on the brink of death for up to 45 minutes. This is because there had not yet been created a way to break the neck when being hung, so an individual would die of a slow strangulation. Ketch was therefore the man who could either slow this process down or speed it up. He is said to have learned a way to tie the rope that could break the neck quickly or render the condemned unconscious. Some believed that if a body was moved quickly enough to a coffin, and if the individual was just merely unconscious, then there was a chance they could be revived with peppermint oil. And although it was very, very, very rare, if a person survived their execution, they were typically allowed to carry on living. That is, of course, if the family got there first and they weren't ripped apart by an angry crowd or snatched up by surgeons. In 1709, years after Ketch's death, John Smith was hanged at Tyburn and left there for some time before being cut down and revived. He was allowed to live out his life, and from that day he was known as Half-Hanged Smith. Now, Jack Ketch is noted in history as being brutal and, more notably, incompetent. One of the first instances of this severe incompetence is the execution of Lord William Russell. Lord Russell was a leading member of the Country Party, also known as the Whigs, and he was openly opposed to the accession of James, the brother of King Charles II, because he was openly Catholic. This landed Russell a date with the executioner after being found guilty of treason. You see, Jack Ketch took 4 blows of the axe to behead Lord Russell. The brutal scenes sparked an outrage in the public, and Jack was forced to write an apology in which he blamed the positioning of Russell and the fact that he was distracted by something causing an interruption whilst swinging, thus making him less efficient than usual. The second noted incompetence was the execution of James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth. Now, James Scott was one of the illegitimate sons of King Charles II, and he was responsible for a failed rebellion in 1685. He attempted to capitalise on his Protestant faith to usurp his Catholic uncle, and as a result he was sentenced to die on July 15, 1685. Monmouth knew that Jack Ketch was unreliable as an executioner, and he knew that Russell had taken 4 swings of the axe to be beheaded. So James Scott paid Jack Ketch 6 guineas and a promise of more after he died if the execution was swift. That is the complete opposite of what happened. Perhaps the bribe insulted Ketch, or as some speculate, he was paid more by somebody else for a botched execution. Or, plain and simple, he was incompetent. But either way, the execution of James Scott was barbaric and bloody. Interestingly, it's noted that the Duke of Monmouth touched the blade and told Ketch that it would not be sharp enough to take his head in one swing, and Ketch said it would be fine and carried on with the execution. James Scott took 4 swings of the axe and a butcher's knife to be beheaded. The first swing caught the back of his head, and it caused him to move and give Jack Ketch an angry look. Ketch then swung the axe 3 more times, but James Scott's head was still attached, and then he cut through the sinew and removed his head with a butcher's knife. Jack Ketch bodged this job so badly that the crowd was riled and angry, and a riot started. If Ketch had stayed, he would have been torn to pieces, but instead he was escorted away by armed guards. It wasn't much longer before Jack was retired. Interestingly, it wasn't his incompetence and lack of skill that cost him his job. It was a confrontation with a sheriff. In 1686, Ketch was sent to Bradwell Prison, and his assistant, Pasha Rose, then took his place, but on his release, Rose was executed at Tyburn for a robbery, and it would be Ketch who would send him to meet his maker via hanging. Jack Ketch then died in the November of 1686, just a little over a year since the botched execution of the Duke of Monmouth. But even though the bringer of death was now dead, his reputation and legacy lived on. For the next 300 years, his name became slang for execution terms. People facing execution became Jack Ketch's pippin. Nooses were Jack Ketch's necklace, and Newgate Prison even named the room where they boiled the limbs of those quartered Jack Ketch's kitchen. Jack Ketch was certainly one of history's most barbaric executioners in England for his sheer incompetence when it came to the axe. His name alone struck fear into those facing their ends, and his legacy lived on in the prisons and executioners that followed in his wake. Jack Ketch, executioner, death, or the devil himself. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.